and we can actually just quickly touch up on what you were just talking about, kind of getting people be self-aligned,
Efficient.
self-sufficient. I mean, kind of essentially being able to some way coach themselves.
Sure. The only problem with coaching yourself, right? You got to be so coaching in the way I actually look at it is very expansive, right? Like it
Yeah.
opens your mind, right? And in order for you to do that, you kind of have to step outside of yourself in order to do, what Reboot calls it as a radical self-inquiry, right? So the thing is, we as humans are not really able to do a radical self-inquiry without it becoming a self-deprecating exercise. You know what I mean? Like, so the thing is so the idea here is not to be self-critical, right? From a perspective of, getting yourself down, right? But you have to be able to open your mind and critically look at yourself, you know what I mean? And meaning that with an interest, with a curiosity, with an intent to explore and expand, not critically as in judging and putting yourself down. Like, that's what I mean. Like, critical thinking doesn't mean that, you're trying to, put a guilt trip on yourself, right? This is a point where you're looking at it from a strategic standpoint. You're looking at yourself from an opportunity of expanding, right? And it's hard for us to do because we get into the existing sort of loops, right? And it's hard for us to jump outside. So it almost has to come as an outside inquiry. This is actually where coaching, come in very, very handy, right? So, and I feel like coaching is actually going to continue to be, a very important capability and a very important profession as we grow as a community, right? As we grow as people, because ultimately, as we're going to continue to grow, this inquiry, that comes externally allows us for, internal growth. Now, self-sufficient, right? And self-centered is not the right word, because now self-centered is seen as something negative, but self-centered meaning that you are in your core know what self is. So your self is centered and is not doing all sorts of loops around, around you, right? So you're not relying on your ego, but you're relying on self, right? Self that knows who you are, what's important to you, what your values are, right? Self that's, open for new growth and opportunities, right? Self is never static. Self always develops, right? So self is not judgmental either. Otherwise, it won't be able to grow. Self-judgment actually hinders our growth. I mean, because it puts limitations and it puts us in a box and it says, oh, nope, you that's bad. You failed. No, you're not good enough, right? Whereas, yourself actually allows to say, okay, cool, this didn't really work out as I planned, but what are the learnings here? Like, what can I do? And it's expanding our boundaries, right? It's pushing our boundaries outwards. And so you're able to learn things, grow internally, right? So that's what I mean by, being self-centered, not as an, egotistical jerk, so, but, and again, that is even a judgment on its own, right? So what's a jerk, right? Like it's a perception, right? Sometimes we act, out of, our own beliefs, right? And we perceive things one way, like, I mean, the way one person may view a situation may not be what the other person may view the situation, but the person who is reacting in one way or the other is based on what the other person is feeling and thinking. So, there are so many ways to perceive and understand that, right? That you have to allow for possibilities, right? And allow for acceptance to happen, right? And the only way you're going to get, that self-sufficient stem, right, is when you're able to accept various opinions without it having a negative impact on you. When you're able to accept the negative, learn from it, move on without it triggering a response. You know what I mean? An emotional response or an adverse action. So this is when you become whole, right? So I guess self-centered in my understanding is like being whole, right? When you are at your core aligned, this is where you are, being your most self. This is when you are able to basically manifest anything in your life, because then you're open to opportunities and you view life as an opportunity of itself.
So that kind of, I mean, becoming self-reliance very much.
Yeah.
So like based on your own encouragement for yourself, the goals you set for yourselves without outside like kind of social validation and things like that.
So validation for me is my progress against my own set goals.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to say that I'm immune from, feedback from external, right? I mean, I haven't quite reached that full alignment, so to speak, right? It's I feel like it's still a definite work in progress. And I think that that's normal, for any human, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we ever going to reach that, full alignment, right? I mean, would have reached that full alignment, but I mean, like in reality, I mean, you would have to be an internal Buddha in a way, right? So, but to strive towards that, to try to make that, part of your life is what I work on every day, right? This is where, of course, EQ and mindfulness, right, and self-awareness really come through, right? For example, somebody said something to me the other day, and I interpreted it as perhaps a diminishing comment to me, right? But the thing is, though, this person may have said it just the way, I mean, whichever, I mean, he may not have even thought anything about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way I have interpreted it based on my own mindset, and based on my own limitations, based on my past experience, in my mind got interpreted as such, right? So instead of getting all offended about it, right, it's one thing to do that, right? Well, poor me, in victim mode, right? But it's one way to see, okay, what triggered me, right? And if I was fully aligned, what would that actually mean? What can I learn from this?
Mm-hmm.
What hangups can I notice within myself that I can capitalize on, right? What can I notice that just triggered me that I can eliminate as a trigger, right? What was it, right? And I mean, again, where every person would be, their own thing, right? And all again stems from our childhoods and from our, childhood traumas, and which is, again, we're stepping into psychology here, right? Which is absolutely normal, but understanding your triggers, understanding that these are the limitations that are holding you back. Because let's just say, I took this, comment personally, right? And I, immediately would have stepped into the victim mode. Immediately as a victim, I would have not taken the action that would have needed, to continue to move me forward. And then all of a sudden I would become stagnant, right? And all of a sudden I started sliding down because now I'm not taking action, right? And so getting moved from that, downwards trajectory, you need to analyze exactly what caused it, why it caused it, and what can you do to elevate yourself back on track, right? And sometimes just acknowledging that that's what happened actually allows for a release of that, right? Acknowledging that, this is how you felt, acknowledging your own emotions, right? First of all, of course, you need to have awareness of your own emotions and feelings and thoughts, right? You have to kind of say, okay, well, this is what happened. But acknowledging that already sets you free in a way, right? It allows you to step over that and take the next step forward. So does that make sense?
Yeah. It's like pretty much like in some sense, it's like when you are triggered in some way, like pay attention to your own reaction and not just reacting, but thinking about like why, like where is that coming from and what you can learn from that. So in the future, when it happens again, you're not triggered, and like pretty much you can not just for that one instance, but even prepare for future potential setbacks of whatever things comes your way. I love that.
So I just want to make sure that we do a bit of a reality check. You're not going to get triggered. So you're going to get triggered regardless of what you do with this. And it's okay, right? So it's okay to get triggered, right? I mean, our habits, our ego was formed not in one day. You can't just get rid of it. You know what I mean? But first and foremost, understanding that you're being triggered, because what's happening, and for my practice, I've seen this quite a bit, right? People get triggered, but they're so caught up in the moment, they don't notice that they got triggered, and they continue with the behavior, right? And then that behavior continues to hinder their progress, right? So they end up, in the same, place, or, even lower, and then they get frustrated and they never get anywhere. And this is, again, like, it's like a never ending cycle. So understanding your emotions, right? This is where, that mindful exercises, come in, where you're allowing yourself to slow down for a minute, right? To slow down, right? I mean, for me, for example, I wear a bracelet. It's my anchor, right? It allows me to, as soon as I see it, I'm like, okay, well, where am I in this moment? How, like, where am I? Like, am I going at 100 miles an hour? I need to stop. Am I reacting? Right? It's my trigger to be like, oh, okay, well, I need to pay attention to where I'm at. And then just doing a check, right? Where are you? What are you feeling? Like, where's your body? I mean, where's the tension coming from? You know what I mean? Like, maybe you have a headache you didn't notice. Maybe your shoulder aches. You know what I mean? Maybe, have you even noticed what something smells like? You know what I mean? Like, maybe taking a few breaths and just acknowledging your surroundings, it will do wonders for your mind. Your mind will take a break, for 1 second, to kind of get recentered and being, oh, well, now, clarity of mind doesn't happen in chaos. Clarity of mind happens in that mindfulness, right? When you stop for a second and allow your brain to process everything that's around you, right? And then you can come up with, the best solution for yourself, right? So you're not going to stop getting triggered. I mean, things will happen regardless. I mean, you can diminish that, trigger, and acknowledge it. And you can accelerate your response to that trigger. So it's not an after fact. I mean, and most of the time, I mean, like, now it's like, oh my goodness, what have I done? And you should have thought about this, right? First is reacting. And it will happen for the first couple of times. And then the time between that you were triggered and the time that you were able to catch the trigger and allow, yourself to make conscious decisions and choose your response versus reacting automatically, that time is going to shrink. So at one point, you're going to get a trigger, you're going to recognize the trigger, and then you're just going to respond as you choose versus, on autopilot. And that is what I'm striving towards, right? This is what I want, is make sure that I understand what my triggers are. I understand how to cope with them, right? And at what point, and I mean, we're given this gorgeous body, right, to sense. We have all these senses, right? I mean, to sense where we are. Our body talks to us all the time. I know we don't notice it, right? So understand how your body is talking to you, right? Like, where the body is paying attention, right? And be like, oh, right, response is different now. Okay. So, like, for example, I may be in a conversation, all of a sudden, I'm starting to feel like my neck's getting stiff and I'm starting to do this, right? And noticing my body, right, is one thing that we can do. I mean, notice what you're doing, right? Like, maybe you're sitting in a meeting and all of a sudden your leg starts going off. And I mean, like, the whole table's shaking, right? It happens, right? But notice that. Notice that's your body talking. That's, maybe it's impatience, maybe you want to change the subject, right? But something here is in dissonance, right? Something, how you're reacting and what your environment is obviously not in alignment, right? And this is why your body is responding to you, right? So pay attention, right? So you can actually make a conscious decision about how you respond to the environment that you're in, right? So it's not like, you're in this constant snowball, but you're able to stop it, right? And look at it and being like, okay, well, you know what? I choose to do this instead, right? So it's giving you the power of choice. And that's amazing.
Yeah. I think that's that's actually part of like the self-awareness, building like
Yeah.
the things that you talk about is like actions to build self-awareness, which is part of emotional intelligence, which is part of like the some of the key parts of building great relationships, getting alignment, etc. Because like it takes practice, like multiple practice, to notice what your body is reacting. Then I think that's like, once you notice, that's the understanding the emotions part, and the trigger and body
Exactly.
signals, and then you can get to the point of what actions you take to regulate that, and
Exactly.
then how you can like positively influence your response or your interactions with your environment, with the people around you.
Exactly. And then you're in alignment, right? So you're all
Yeah.
of a sudden not in distance with yourself. You're in alignment with what you're doing, how you're viewing things, right? You're choosing. And that's a powerful thing. Choice is an amazing gift, right? When you get to choose, you are in power, you're in control of yourself, you are the creator. You know what I mean? So when you get to choose what you do, is when you start getting into that creative energy. This is when you start, manifesting things for yourself. This is when you start making your dreams in reality, is when you start choosing.
That's great. Yeah. I love that you mentioned like the creative power and kind of creating things for yourself and choosing. I think that's, it's like partly, I mean, some people are in the community are trying to figure out like, okay, what should I do next? And I have this big goal, for example, getting my whole team to be aligned. How do I get there, and etc. I think some of those could be part of the small steps towards achieving those
Certainly,
goals.
certainly. But I mean, if you want to talk about alignment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you want to get your team aligned, and we're kind of switching subjects here, but I know this is
Mm-hmm.
important, so I want to touch on this.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to get people aligned with you,
Mm-hmm.
make sure that you're first aligned on your values, right? You want to have a long-term alignment. Make sure that you
Mm-hmm.
are viewing things the same way, because ultimately, if you're not aligned on your values, different things are going to
Mm-hmm.
be important, right? So I never stop saying this. So life is all about priorities. What's a priority to you, and what drives your priorities,
Mm-hmm.
right? Values drive our priorities, right? What's important to us, right, is what we value, right? So our values is what we value, right? So I know this does not sound very profound, but but this is the very core of it, and it's easy to overlook, right? I mean, most people are like, oh, I don't want to go through the values exercise. I mean, that's not
Mm-hmm.
really that important. Well, okay, that's great. But then when you're making a decisions, do you know what's important to you and why you're making this decision, right? So I know that all of a sudden stops people in their tracks and be like, well, I don't know why I'm making this. Okay, well then, take a moment and think what's important, right? And if you want to get aligned with another person, well, then make sure that those values are very much in alignment, right? Or at least in the same type of category, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for example, fulfillment and enjoyment, right? So seems to be the same thing, but dig deeper. What does that actually mean, right? Like, what does fulfillment mean and what does enjoyment mean,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, I mean, sound very similar, right? But in reality, I mean, enjoyment can be somebody working extremely hard on something that they're extremely passionate about, right? And fulfillment, for example, may be a having a big picture view on things. Like
Mm-hmm.
anything can be fulfilling, right? So one is very specific, like I'm going to drive this down, right? And fulfillment may be, for somebody walking around, on the street and enjoying the surroundings, right? Or vice versa. I mean, these things can be very, very
Mm-hmm.
interchangeable. Actually, fulfillment could be, very much of somebody who's working extremely hard, but on something that they love, and they don't even notice that that's, taking away all this time, because that's the time that they see as valuable. But maybe somebody thinks of enjoyment as, a day on, at the beach, and then the work-life balance, which, you know what I mean? Like, different things bring joy. So make sure you understand what is it that drives this value, right? So you're on the same page. Even though the value sounds very similar, different things drive it. So don't just stop at the surface level of the value, right? So understand what is the core on each. You know what I mean? Like, how did this value come about? Now, of course, that's an alignment also with the, mission and vision. I mean, like, what are you on the mission to do? Like, what's your big vision? Like, what's the end result, right? What are your expectations? Like, get aligned on the expectations, because if one is expecting this and the other one expecting that, and these things are not in alignment, right, then these two things, are probably not going to work well together. For example, with team members, right, make sure that you understand how your expectations are on the same page, right? And if there is a disagreement, and by the way, I want to make sure there's a distinction between disagreement, right, and a misalignment. Now, misalignment is a very global type of perspective, right? It allows for an opportunity to get realigned, or rethink, how and what, together collectively, right? Disagreement is usually personal, right? It's driven by a personal standpoint and the need to prove yourself right. So I would like for you to have maybe sometimes a misalignment. I would prefer for you to have a misalignment, right? Because that's workable, right? Like, you can get aligned if there's a disconnect right in there. So you can most definitely work on getting this connected. But if you have a disagreement, right, and if that's the root cause of the misalignment is the disagreement, and the ego is involved, right, then you got to put that ego aside and understand that there's a misalignment. And I mean, of course, not all misalignments work out, right? Sometimes you just misalign on the vision or misalign on the values, and that's the end. But in disagreement, when the ego is involved, that needs to be something that's separated out of the conversation, right? So your conversations should not be driven by your need to prove that you're right. So, or to prove that you're worthy, or to prove that your point of view really matters, right? And it does. Know inherently that your point of view matters, right? Know that at your core. This is where, again, that alignment with yourself is so hugely important, and sense of self is hugely important. But I feel like, the disagreement, needs to not come or not to be driven by your ego's need to prove its existence. Anyway, trust is going to be huge. Make sure that trust is there, right? And trust is developed through actions, right? Is through consistent actions, right? Trust is not a once, day thing, right? It's an evolution of actions, right? And for one, knowing how trust is evolved, right? Of course, boundaries. Know the other person's boundaries and respect them. I mean, that's huge. Understand, where it's okay, right? Like, I think everybody should understand first and foremost their own boundaries, but then understand and respect the other person's boundaries. So that respect, is going to be one of the key elements in developing good relationships, right? And a good alignment. Now, communication, like whether it's styles of communication, right? I mean, you have to respect different people have different ways of communicating, but understand the cadence of communication, right? So communication has to be open, right? But also respectful, right? Open communication doesn't mean that you get an opportunity to insult whoever you want, right, at any time, right, and tell them what you think. Put the communication in a constructive way where you are relaying your point of view, respecting the other person's point of view, and opening discussion for a buy-in, right? So communication is not a one-sided element. Communication is always a two-way track, and you got to meet yourself. It's like a tango, right? You have to get in sync. So very important. I mean, and again, I think ego I already mentioned, but I mean, I think these are like some of the key elements of that. I mean, we can certainly, make this a separate topic, for another time, but I feel like that's, these are the key things that are important in alignment.
Yes. So discussing values, see if there's any kind of like, even the words that people use might be different, and see it if there's any commonalities there. And then figure out like, okay, if there's disagreement, is it because of the ego or more fundamental value kind of disagreement? And then like discuss the mission and vision. It could be like people have different views on the mission and vision, but maybe through discussions, communication, you can kind of bring something together, like bring everyone's idea and make something that works for everyone. And then the trust, that takes time and like through different iterations, but hopefully that the trust can be built up over time and then be aligned in some way.
Consistent action, right? Consistent action where you come through with the promises that you've made, right? It's trust is, of course, developed also, through clear communication with respect, what I mean, where you respect the other person and their boundaries and their personal needs, right? I think that's huge, right? So I'm seeing this, very often these days, is that is not there, but it's simply because people don't know what their boundaries are. They're not good at communicating their boundaries, but also the other party is not understanding where those boundaries are. So this communication has to be one of the key elements of that, is where you come together in an open conversation, right, with respect for the other person, right? Just the respect for another human being, right? Trust is developed, but respect, you can respect anybody and their opinion, and even if you don't agree, right? So respect is where ego steps aside.
Yeah, that's great. I love to emphasize on the respect part. I mean, these are like some of the key elements that like we might not always be thinking about, like because when people have goals or agenda and like people are so focused on like reaching those goals and sometimes like forget about the human side of things, including myself sometimes would do that, and kind of like it's good to always think about these important parts that we might not be thinking of sometimes.
Yep. Great. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ilona.
Yes, anytime. I'm very happy to participate in these conversations. I think they're very, very important. And most importantly, I think that they open minds and help you think differently, that, they bring awareness to how you've been doing things and what you should be doing going forward, right? Obviously it is your decision and your choice how you want to proceed, but hopefully, the audience would be taking these as, points to grow and develop, points to bring awareness, to how they're being and what's important to them.
Yeah, thank you. I think the self-awareness part is key.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I think we're good for free form.
Recording. I think you're still recording.
Okay. I'll just keep it go recording in case we start talking about something that like we should have recorded it.
Yeah, I do have a meeting though. I'm now with I have a meeting.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah, thanks a lot, and I'll let you go to prepare the next one.
Okay, thank you. So what do you think? Were there any nuggets in there?
Wait, did you say you have a meeting you have to go now?
Yeah, I have a meeting to go to, but
okay.
A quick question. Were there any nuggets? What would you think it was helpful?
I think so. I love it that we didn't plan it, but you talk a lot about the self-awareness part and like kind of like self-reliance and etc. These are very important parts. And I mean, alignment, I think we like the way that you phrase it, there are action steps that people can take now instead of like being in the cloud, like what do I do?
Yeah. Well, we can follow up with questions to get aligned. Questions that you ask yourself, plus questions that you offer for discussion.
Okay.
So I can put those together probably over the weekend. So.
Okay, yeah, sounds great. And I sent you some of the advisor documents, so we can chat about it when you have a chance. No rush.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. All right. So hopefully this was valuable. Yes.
This is, yeah, it's absolutely. Yeah, I'll share some of the recordings, and if you like
Okay.
them, then we can publish some of them.
Sounds like a plan. All right.
Yeah. Have a
Thanks
great
a lot.
weekend. Have a
Yes, you
great
too.
anniversary weekend. Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot. Bye.
Bye.